careful, please. That elite was an ultra.
Only Mormons have free will. And that sounds a little insane, but I'm going to explain. So, free will versus determinism, the age-old question that has been debated for centuries by many people far smarter than myself. But today I will throw my hat in the ring with my model for free will and determinism. Source, I made it up. Source? I made it up. So, I think that Mormons have a very unique perspective on free will and the problem of evil that gives us kind of an edge over other churches' explanations, because there's many types of Christian churches. Some of them do not believe in free will. For example, the Calvinist approach, as best I understand it, is that your time here on earth is kind of a roller coaster that you are sitting in, and you just go through the motions in a sense. And at the end of the roller coaster, you get tossed into the oven of hell, or you get tossed into heaven. And that's kind of the Calvinist approach. You're saved. God has given you everything about you and everything that you ever experience, and so it is silly to suppose that you have some sort of control when you don't. Everything is for God's glory. That's as well as I understand it. Now, I hope I can get some Calvinists in the comments being, "Oh no, that's not what we actually believe." No, that would be cool. I would actually have fun with that. So, another approach that I've heard is that God knows what you're going to do, but He is special so that He can know what you're going to do without forcing you to do it. And this is really hard for me to grasp and understand. It doesn't feel like real free will. Doesn't feel like I'm truly making a decision if He already knows, and He's the one who created everything about me, and He's the one who put me into the situation, and then when I picked it, He knew that's what I was going to pick, yet somehow it's my fault. That just feels like determinism with extra steps, in my opinion. Some of these very grace-focused churches essentially deny free will. You just simply need to recognize you are saved, and that's about it. And all of this is just unworkable within the Mormon framework. We need something that can explain things a little bit better, which is why I really appreciate this doctrine we have of intelligences that are eternal, and they always were. They are co-eternal with God and with every other intelligence that has ever been. And what is an intelligence? It is a conscious mind. So your mind, this theatrical experience that happens between your ears and eyes that no one will ever experience except for you, that, in my opinion, is what an intelligence is. Our entire experience on this physical world is through our eyes, ears, touch, our senses. And without our bodies, I would assume that we can perceive things and interact with things spiritually, and with spiritual matter, whatever that means. But without our spirit bodies, because we were born spiritually, there are certain people who have been saying, "Oh, well, there's no such thing as spiritual birth, and Joseph Smith never taught it." This is just ridiculous. I'm not even gonna engage with that further than just to say that it's stupid. But yes, before we were born spiritually, we were an intelligence that had, I would assume, almost no way of interacting with anything. And so, in a sense, we were kind of trapped in an eternal dream, which is kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. Now, each of these intelligences, we are told, have different levels of greatness, and there is one intelligence who is the greatest of all, who we would call God, though I don't think that this greatest of all God, this head intelligence, I don't think that's God the Father, and I'll have to explain that some other time. But the intelligences, they have unique attributes. Some of them are noble and great ones, others are probably more unsavory. But God, in His infinite mercy, has devised a system wherewith all intelligences can be tested, and they can prove their quality for good or for evil. The point is we have this consciousness, and it is something that is uniquely ourselves. And I really like this because there is something that is inherently me, that God has given a spirit and a body and a life that He has placed me into wherewith I can develop those internal things that are unique to me. And I don't have to worry about a God who would create evil and create, with the problem of evil. We don't really have to worry about that because we know that some of these intelligences are not good. They're just not good. And they are getting a chance because God is merciful, not because they are good. And luckily, most of the worst never made it to this existence, this physical realm, I suppose we can call it. So my model for free will, and I thought of this while I was in my probability class in school, but basically God doesn't know the future. God doesn't know the future. He knows all futures, and he knows the probability of all of them. So if you think of it like a tree, so the past extends into the past like a tree trunk, like there's only one past. And then you, in the present, are at the base of the tree, where it starts to split and turns into this giant mess of roots. There's a giant mess of roots. It's tangled with the roots of many other trees. And you can think of these like paths into the future. Some of them lead to damnation. We're going to simplify things here. I'm not going to talk about the kingdoms, but we'll just say some of them lead to perdition or damnation, and some of them lead to salvation, exaltation, the highest glory, that sort of thing. We'll just call it light and dark. So there are dark paths, there are light paths. And as we go through life making choices, every time we choose good, there are dark paths that are eliminated from possibility. And when we choose evil, there are paths that are light that are eliminated from possibility. And our choices also affect the opportunities of other people. And this is as obvious as saying that you can commit horrible sins against another person and damage their potential. And I think that God has fail-safes for that, at least in the next life, so to account for some of those problems. But it puts a lot of responsibility on us to maximize our potential because it affects our children and our children's children, and it helps us. I really like this because it helps me think of my choices in terms of hundreds of years and who they affect, which is how we should be thinking, because God truly stands outside of time. And in this model, he stands outside time entirely, which I like. And he is all-knowing because he knows all of the paths, right? He just doesn't know which one we will choose yet, though he likely knows which are the most likely. And he's designed things to help maximize the number of paths that lead us to the good place. So think of it as you go through life, you're closing doors. And every time you make a good decision, you're closing bad doors. And when you're making bad decisions, you're closing good doors. And eventually there's only going to be one door left for you. And you're going to have to walk through that door. And one would hope that that is the door at which the bridegroom is waiting. And that seems kind of weird and overly complicated, but I do think that it makes a lot of sense. So as you go through life, you can kind of think, if you, in jewelry making, the gold or whatever needs to be heated and then quenched in water or whatever to soften it. It's called annealing. And then as you go working on the metal, it slowly hardens and it needs to be annealed once again. And I think of in life, when we are born, we are brimming with potential. And as we go along our lives, we kind of work harden. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And this is part of God's plan. And it's probably why we don't live very long. But basically, if we commit the unpardonable sin, then the Spirit will cease to strive with us. And what does that mean? So the way I understand that in this model is that if you commit the unpardonable sin, your character that you've developed through your choices in life, all those little paths that extend out into the future, all of them lead to perdition, I guess, or to darkness. And you've basically sealed your fate, I guess is a good way of saying it. And for that reason, God withdraws His Spirit from you. On the flip side of that, there is this idea of your calling and election being made sure. And as you go through life, and if you are living righteously, you can get to a point where all of those paths that extend into the future lead to exaltation. And we're told that at this point, you cannot fail. And so this model accounts for the calling and election made sure as well. And then there's foreordination, which is you are told that you are going to have the opportunity to have certain privileges or roles in your life should you choose to accept them. And this jives with the whole many are called but few are chosen. So perhaps in many of our futures there's all sorts of opportunities, but few of us choose to rise to the occasion. And I also think it fits well with the scripture about Captain Moroni, where Mormon says if everyone was like Moroni, then the gates of hell would be sealed. And Moroni is not, I don't know, he's not exactly perfect. He's contrasted a lot with Helaman, who there's like this two-front war, and Moroni is on one front and Helaman is on the other. Grant Hardy talks a lot about this in his book. But Helaman's war is very spiritual. They have the stripling warriors who are miraculously saved, and Moroni is resourceful and cunning, and he does the best with what he can. So I don't even think that Moroni is being held up as this almost perfect man when we say that. I think it's mostly about his dedication to the truth. But regardless, if we were like Moroni, the gates of hell would be sealed, and so kind of all those paths that lead to darkness could be eliminated. Anyway, I think that covers basically most of my thoughts. Oh, Joseph Smith, he also talks a lot about how we have the ability to overcome sin and we can't be tempted unless we choose to, which there's a heretic whose name was like Pelagius, I think, who he taught that basically sin is optional. You can choose not to do it. And the only person who has chosen not to do it was Jesus Christ. Everyone else has personally chosen evil at least once. I don't know, I really like that we all could be sinless, but we all chose not to be. And that Christ, he was the only one who was willing. And I like that. I think it's cool. I think it works with this as well, in that there is a path for everyone that is sinless, but we just don't choose it. And we've all chosen evil, at least once. And this elevates Christ in my mind to being this willing sacrifice when no one else was willing. And I like how that tastes, I guess, is that's an expression that Joseph Smith would use sometimes. So the Pelagian heresy confirmed as truth? I don't know. But it is worth thinking about. I do think that Mormons have some very unique theology that supports and explains free will very well, and it explains the problem of evil very well. Some types of evil have just always been, like the spider in Lord of the Rings is apparently like an uncreated evil, like God didn't create it, it just crawled out of the darkness. And perhaps those sorts of creatures do exist. I sure hope not, but there may be intelligences that are not human and never were, and are simply pure evil. And yeah, that's kind of a little nightmare to keep you up at night, but yeah. Anyway, we're thinking about free will and the idea of God not knowing the future, but knowing all futures and all possible interactions, all paths, constantly working with you to try and get you to change your habits and your character, which are the same thing, apparently, according to Aristotle, but your habits and your character, and God is constantly working on you like a blacksmith and trying to soften you through trials and shape you to maximize your potential and to limit the number of paths that are possible, I suppose, that lead to the bad place. So, and that's why God is always striving with us. That's why I think I like it, because it means every time you feel the Spirit, it means there is still hope for you. And I don't mean to try and diminish the role of grace or faith, because I do think that without God, we will fail. There is a lot of what we think is free will that simply isn't really free will. So I think that in some senses free will is more limited than what we would suspect. And perhaps in other ways, there's maybe parts of our free will that we're not conscious of. Like an example of this would be driving your car, and there's that sensation that you kind of lose time because you've driven so much it's become almost second nature, subconscious, and when you're on the freeway for a while, you'll just kind of get lost in your thoughts and you'll be like, where did the last few miles go? That sensation. So free will is not exactly everything that you're conscious of. Anyway, different things we're thinking about. I find it a very helpful model to understand how all these different scriptures work together. And yeah, that's your thought for the day. And stay faithful. Have a good one.